Dubai-based corporation AL-Futtaim Group entered the Kenyan market in the year 2014 through a full acquisition of automotive dealer CMC Holdings at a cost of $86 million. This saw CMC delist its shares from the Nairobi Securities Exchange, and the firm has no plans to go public, and that's according to the new CEO, Kass. Here's more. CMC is quite an interesting story, but let's start in 2014 when AL-Futtaim Group, bought the company, $86 million. It was one of the biggest talked after deals in Kenya that year. But paint us a picture of how the new CMC looks like now.
Well, I think, Charles, 86 million is a lot of money, but we thought it was well invested because this was our entry point into East Africa, and it was one that was very new to us, being in the north for many years. So 2014, I think the first thing was to build the relationship back up with our suppliers, our principal relationships. As you realise, we'd had a couple of franchises that were terminated prior to the acquisition. And one of my first jobs was to set about straightening those relationships and, more importantly, delisting the company. Because we are now 100% privately owned by the AL-Futtaim Group, and we delisted in October 2014. Quite a lot of regulatory and governance around that, a lot of adverse press in the years, but thankfully we have gone 100% private and we feel a whole lot better for it.
What's your assessment of the Kenyan market when you are talking about cars for the time that you've been here?
Initially we were a GOC supplier. All we ever did was supply to government institutions, particularly on things like Ranger, and also, of course, Defender, that is no longer with us today, Land Rover Defender. Now what we've done is we've reached out to the fleet customers, the corporate customers. Some of our larger corporates now are beginning to take the CMC brands very seriously. So what we've had to do is relook at our entire strategy to say what are our sales channels and what do we want for the future, so that we have a blend of business rather than be reliant upon one channel.
Now, before we get into the commercial section, let's look at Ford, Suzuki, Mazda. How are these brands positioned in the Kenyan market? And I'm asking because I know for a long time we've been regarded to as a Toyota nation.
Well, it's a great question. It's one that I'm asked of all the time. I think Ford, and I say this consistently, is in the best place it's been for a decade. Why? Because it's got over-engineered products. They've got wonderful specification. Their engines are the most economical and the most efficient that there are. And even last year when we was awarded the 530 units by way of the National Police tender, the evaluation score by way of the technical score was the highest amongst all other brands. Now, when we come to the other brands, Mazda share quite a lot of Ford by way of technology and platforms, and the BT50 is the equivalent of the Ford Ranger. Different face, slightly different look, but does the same job. And the Mazda brand is absolutely fast emerging. It was a brand that lay dormant in this country for many years, but as you can see, by way of the new generation products, it's vibrant and it's got a bit of youth to it as well, which is interesting. Now, Suzuki is a brand that is synonymous with Kenya. Why? There's a large Asian community. They're building products now from the small B-segment car right the way up to the Vitara. They're building an Omni, a Gypsy, and let me tell you, value-based proposition, it fits beautifully between Ford, Mazda, and kind of the value chain at the bottom, but it's tremendous.
Now, the commercial vehicles segment is doing quite well in Kenya. What's your assessment of this market, and what is the strategy for AL-Futtaim Group?
Well, again, it's a great question, Charles, because what we've got again is we've got the Aisha brand that competes head-on with Ashok Leyland, Tata and Hino. The yellow truck, as we call it, fast emerging, particularly amongst the counties. Eldoret, Kisumu, very strong by way of a proposition. Then what we've got is upstream. We've got the MAN product that competes with Volvo and a couple of the other high stream brands. But the beautiful thing about the MAN product is that we're into CKD. We're into assembly here in Thika, which we're a third way owner with the Kenyan government. We want prosperity, we want employment, and it is a top-notch product. And what's beautiful about it is that we were once known as a bus company that became a truck company that became a car company. Now suddenly buses are high on the agenda, and MAN have the best proposition on the market.
Now, agriculture, of course, tractors are now, it's a segment that Kenyans are focusing on a lot more. But when you look at, just help us understand to what use they go, because we understand agriculture from small scale in Kenya mostly. So who are the kind of people, again, that you're seeing being interested in your tractors?
Well, we're seeing overseas investors, we're seeing large conglomerates wanting to invest in agriculture. the Kenyan government are particularly keen on expanding the agricultural business. So our business is the breadth of the country. It's from Mombasa in the south, but of course the heart of it will obviously be Nakuru in the west. 90% of our business is done in the west of Kenya, and it ranges really from a very small TT40 right the way up to high-spec TS6. So the value chain is immense in tractors, but in fairness, Charles, our product has always been at the top. Our blue tractor, as we call it, still has a market share way in excess of 50%.
Do you feel like the importation of second-hand cars, which is a major activity here in Kenya, poses a threat for people like you are selling new cars?
Well, we've looked at second-hand cars and we feel no. And the reason we don't is this. Once upon a time, the relationship between the new car market and the used car market was 1-8. It's now 1-5. What we've got to do is get more people on the entry point. Young Kenyans that have left university into their first job. What we want them seeing is coming onto the value chain by way of new product and migrating them through the range until they get the car of their dreams. But they've got to start somewhere on the ladder.
And how are you doing that? Do you have, because one of the reasons is affordability. People are not able to afford new cars. Do you have specific products maybe that you'd say, this is what we are getting the young people with and they will afford?
Well, without giving too many secrets away, I think we know that asset finance has been troublesome. Non-performing loans, delinquencies over the last 6 months. What we're trying to do is say to the customer at the bottom who wants to get on that chain, well, you know what? Let us help you by way of deposit creation. In other words, the minimum deposit in, the monthly payments will still be sustainable, and at the end of it, give them the option. The option is either give the car back or to refinance the car for a further period. And what that does is, Charles, it shortens not just the period, but it actually reduces the monthly payment.
Now, before AL-Futtaim Group came to the picture, CMC was listed at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Are there plans to relist back?
Well, I think every reporter's asked me that question in the last month, and the way we see it is this: we're a humble, private, 70-year-old family business, and I think we'd like it to remain that way. And the way that the owner sees it is very simple. Being private, we're in control of our decision-making processes and we can make decisions faster. So I would say to you that there's certainly no foreseeable future plans to come back to the IPO stage.